Welcome, it's Elisse Miki here, your host for the Whole Horse Podcast. We're here to look at all the ways that the horse industry is changing before our very eyes in very cool, very amazing ways. And we're chatting with the people at the forefront of that change, the professionals, the trainers, the body workers, the researchers that are helping our lives with horses become better and better. Thanks for being here. I love that you're here and listening and learning. And if you ever have a guest that you want to suggest or a topic that you want to hear, just let me know and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. It means a lot. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Whole Horse Podcast. It's Elisse Miki here, and we're here today with one of my good friends and colleagues and teaching mate and one of my favorite guests. Elisse Miki is here. Welcome, Elisse.
Hey, Alexa. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, you're so welcome.
As if we don't spend enough time together.
It's always a pleasure to chat. There's a level of geekiness that we can achieve that is so satisfactory to my body, my mind, and my soul. I'm really, really pleased to have you back. And we wanted to chat today about essentially some pieces that have been coming up a lot now within the equine world, at least in our little bubble, which I'm so happy to hear this coming forward. And we wanted to get a little more into it and really drop into some of the pieces around these topics. I'm being very, very, mysterious, to get a sense of, number one, how long they've actually kind of been around in terms of human science. And number two, some of the edges that we can look at to support our horses more within these spaces. So, Elisse, I'm going to just get you to share a little bit more about these mystery topics that we want to speak to, and some of your, why you love working in this area of things.
Okay. As a broad way of explaining it, we're going to talk about the nervous system. Okay. But there's lots and lots of information going on right now about how to train the nervous system, how to facilitate adaptation in the nervous system movements, nervous system therapy, right? That it's a bit overwhelming for people, I think, all these different terms. But what we're here to talk about today is how these terms are actually basically all saying the same thing. We're all saying the same thing. For me, I call it motor control. That's how I was taught it when I went to school. So that's sort of the terminology that I came to know and that I'm comfortable with. But a lot of this work is called, somatic work or working within the nervous system. There's other terms like neurokinetic therapies, right? Like that too is working within the nervous system. We know for us, like in osteopathy and kinesiology as well, we're always working within the nervous system, right? That's a huge piece of our therapeutic lens and treatment. But I think it's getting confusing maybe for some people when it doesn't need to be, right? We're all saying the same thing. I call it motor control, and it's a huge piece of my therapeutic toolkit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I love watching you with your horses. I just wrote an article about Elise's, I call them her wonder horse Sparky, because he's over 40 years old and he acts like a 5-year-old, he runs around, does a bunch of cool stuff, still is ridden, all these sorts of things. So, for me, number one, I think, for people out there that are working with any horse that has, whether we call it motor control issues, lameness issues, changes in ability, changes in function, what are some of the key ways that you really, utilize in your work with your horses, with other horses, client horses, to support, whether it's the nervous system, other parts of the system, to be more functional.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a huge piece of my work. And I learned really early on with my horses that this was mandatory if we were going to move forward and rehab, right? There's no way to retrain movement patterns without retraining movement patterns. So I dive deep into that really early on. And I think that's why a lot of my herd, I mean, most of them are over 25, 30, right? And we still have them out walk, trot, cantering at Liberty and moving about all day on the track. And this question gets asked a lot to me, like, how come your horses are so mobile at these ages and with the pathologies they came with? My answer is this, right? It's a motor control work. Yes, there's lots of therapy that I did on them manually in the beginning to free up the structures that needed help. Okay. But it's important to understand that beyond that, nowadays, no, I don't treat them all the time, right? Because they have mobility now in their body. And it's up to them now to move their bodies because they have access to all the things here on the property, right? I do work with them through some of the obstacles. So I've put a lot of videos up about that work because I find the obstacles are really helpful when we're retraining motor control or motor pathways. It's a great fun way, and we'll get into why the fun part is actually essential to neuroplasticity. But yeah, it's fun for both of you. It's a great way to build connection. And then on top of it all, you get to do these movements that are activating new pathways without even knowing it, right? Just by doing the movement. So that kind of summarizes a bit how I've used it in my practice. I think it's important maybe to sort of talk about like the main thing that happens with horses is that injury strikes, right? And so why does this happen in the first place? Like, why are our horses moving strange, or why did my horse go lame, right? What preceded that? So yeah, we'll dive in. When there's an injury, right, as we know, there's going to be tissue damage, and our brains and theirs, this is how we're similar. We're wired for survival, right? That is the number one sort of need, the primary need for humans and horses, survival. So when there's injury inflicted onto tissue, right, our brain registers that as damage. And it's like, okay, protect, right? We have to. That's what we need, which is great. And that's what we call the acute phase of healing, where everything goes into lockdown. We get, compensate, muscle guarding. We get lots of inflammation and all that. So that's acute. In that phase, we're just focusing on that acute phase. But what happens after that, right? How do we manage this injury once we're no longer in this acute phase? And why does the body stay in these old patterns? Okay, so that's another question I get a lot. Like, well, why doesn't it just go back to normal? Well, unfortunately, our brain is so great that it's found a solution, and it's pretty happy with that solution it's found to get these movements accomplished. So why would we go back to an old pattern when we have a new solution, right? So it's a double-edged sword. But that's a lot of the reason it doesn't go back. We've adapted to this new way of moving after an injury. So have they. No, it doesn't always just go back on its own. Pain is a huge limiting factor to that too. So if there's pain, of course, the brain is not going to be open to rewiring a new pathway when it's in a, sort of a quote unquote pain-free pathway at the moment. So there's a lot of factors that contribute to why it doesn't just go back on its own and why intervention is so important. Do you have any questions on that at this point?
No, not yet. Keep going.
Okay. I think we could start by simply defining like what we're talking about when we're talking about motor control. Okay.
Yes.
So motor control. This is the process that our nervous system goes by, in which it coordinates muscles and limbs. Okay, so we don't move one muscle at a time, right? We know that when we're walking, there's many muscles activating. This is what a movement pattern is. And this is why we can't treat or train muscles in isolation. It's absolutely impossible because a movement pattern requires multi-muscle activation, right? The simple example I use with clients is like for humans, like a squat, right? So if we go to sit down into a chair, we don't have one muscle turn on and turn off, right? We've got about 50, maybe more, as we're descending into the chair, right? We're going to get activation of that whole anterior chain, like all the hip flexion and everything. And then the posterior chain is going to be loading, right? So we've got glutes, hamstrings, calves, lower back, the core, the scapula, the shoulder girdle. Like these are all turning on when we do one movement pattern, like a sit, right? Same thing for them. So that's why it's really futile to be chasing one muscle or one joint when we see a lameness, right? We have to look at the whole picture and say, okay, what's going on in this movement chain and try to figure out where the dysfunction is coming from. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's really hard, right? That's why we go to school for this. I think my frustration arose really early on with the horses because I spent a lot of time on this in my education, and I was taught how to break down movement patterns, how to determine if we have a true mobility issue or if we have a movement pattern issue. Like there's special tests we can do. There's range of motion measures we take, and that gives us that information. But I found myself frustrated going through a lot of my equine trainings because a lot of the stuff was not talked about. Mm-hmm. Or we were taught to sort of assess segmentally, right? One joint.
Passively, segmentally. Yeah.
Okay, well, just look, so the flexor tendon is swollen, let's say. Well, let's look at the fetlock. Okay, so that's great, right? But we also have to look above and below that joint and see why it is that tendon's being strained in the first place, right? Unless we've had a blow to it, of course. So yeah, there isn't a ton of this sort of systematically breaking down of movement patterns in an assessment for horses. I don't find a lot of information on that, which is why I've been forging my own path here and really trying to just utilize what we do with humans and apply that to the horses. And it's working. Okay. Luckily, we're both mammals. So while they're on 4, so their plane of movement is a little different than us, but their joints are the same. Okay. So we have the same types of joints. We have the same types of muscles. We have the same types of movement patterns. So it's no different. We are able to break down those movements and get the answers as to where the pattern of dysfunction is arising. And then furthermore, what we can do to retrain that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it brings to mind so many questions, about, so often we jump on a specific joint or, the testing is for lameness is often, a nerve block or looking at, specific areas. And this sense, with us both as equine body workers, you and I both know, I know I've never put my hands on a horse that doesn't need body work. Mm-hmm. It just hasn't happened yet. I've been doing this for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. Because horses are under an incredible amount of interesting stressors.
Yeah, right? Wide range of stressors too. Internal stressors, external stressors, emotional stressors, like
completely
physiological stressors,
stressors. Yeah. And the chances of them moving through that unscathed by such things is low. And I get to this place thinking about, we have movement and then, how much can be corrected by movement. Mm-hmm. And then we have like therapy, mm-hmm. and it's like, okay, I always get to this spot of like, okay, where do these two things meet, mm-hmm. and mm-hmm. what does that look like? What does that combination look like? Right. Yeah. For myself and my healing, with my lumbar spine and my fun bulge disc injury, it was a combo. It was like, okay, I got body work, but I also needed to strengthen and facilitate a broader range of movement and a change of my neural pathways and patterns. Right. It was both things. So I didn't actually fully improve until I added the movement and exercise piece into the equation.
That's a fundamental piece of human strength and conditioning, human rehabilitation, is that we are never, ever to exercise or train dysfunction. Okay. So, but then why so are we doing this with the horses? Oh, they're lame. They've got to train more, right? Well, no, we would never treat a human athlete that way. So it's mind boggling to me that it's such a dichotomy in the ways that we handle this. But yeah, I mean, with humans, that's a second knowledge to me. Like if there's dysfunctional movement patterns, we don't load more weight onto a dysfunctional movement pattern. An example or a simple one to visualize is people come in a lot with hip mobility or hip weakness issues, right? Like humans. And a simple test is the Swat test. We watch what happens in a squat. If the knees are caving in the squat, it's very common. Okay. So as the person's dropping down into the squat, we see the knees kind of coming inward, valgus knee, right? So now if I dump a bunch of weight on that over thousands of repetitions without correcting that, we've now only further trained the dysfunction. And what's the result? That knee joint can only take so much shear force, right? So it's going to be okay. But over time, that's going to break down. Same for horses. I mean, that's the way I see it. If we see a dysfunctional movement pattern, why are we loading weight and loading training velocities up on it before correcting that movement pattern? And that's where I've stepped in and tried to do my best to retrain movement patterns with the horses while keeping them moving, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think we often see one of two things. We see either that lame, quote unquote, lame horse with dysfunctional movement patterns is put into more training, more work. Okay, let's work it out of them. Added medication, added joint injections, this and that, right?
Armoring up
cut the nerve, whatever we need to do, right? Or they're put on stall rest, lack of movement, completely out of the sense of being able to move freely. Right. Yeah. So there's sort of these two often extremes, right? Not all the time, but often that's, one or the two things.
Well, yeah. Right? That was sort of a traditional management of injuries, way back when. And that was how it started out, early on for humans too. But as science has evolved and as our understanding has evolved around movement, we see the human world diverging pretty quickly, feel, right? Into this movement sort of retraining mindset. And that, yes, we do need to rewire pathways. We also need to treat the original cause of the injury, right? Treat those tissues, free them up, and then get that nervous system rewiring as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think so often we separate the nervous system out from the injury.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And what, I'd love to get into today is like, how are they related? Because I think for a lot of people, when you're seeing tissue damage, specifically when it's like, oh, there's a joint that's actually inflamed, or like it's something super more obvious, let's say, right? Or the suspensory is breaking down or whatnot. We're not always thinking about what role does the nervous system have to play in this, right? And how do we support the nervous system in this process of healing? And we sort of separate those two things from each other. And I would love to hear more, because I know that the nervous system, as an osteopath or, an osteopathic practitioner, I know that like the nervous system is everything. When someone shows up on my table and they have an acute injury, I don't immediately go to that injury.
No.
You know what I do? I treat the nervous system.
Definitely.
Right away.
Right? Like
right away. I want to take the brace out of the system. Yeah. I want to be able to see what I'm actually working with, because immediately after, if there's been an impact or, like an injury that is very painful, the nervous system is sending off these alarm bells, and there's a lot of brace in that system that I'm not going to physically be able to like work through with, in the area. Right. And so, that's something, I've been so appreciative for this education to understand is, if I go to the nervous system, if I calm the nervous system, it can actually get a clearer picture of what is happening in the body.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely my rule of thumb ingrained in me 20 years ago that number one, we remove the pain stimulus. Okay. So the number one thing when there's an injury, horse human, the horse is presenting as lame and there's obvious pain. Our number one job is to remove the pain first and foremost, because there's nothing we can do to move through when there is pain, right? Pain needs to be gone in order for the brain to release those instructions, right? The brain is giving instructions to brace because there's pain. So unless we break that cycle by alleviating the pain in that acute phase, we're not going to be able to then move to step 2, which is correcting the movement issue in the first place or correcting the injury in the first place, right? But first, we must remove pain. So right there, to me, I mean, that's a clear rule that I have right away. I don't have a problem with using pain supports in acute, okay? So one of my horses, when he arrived, he was in the process of fusing and he had ring bone. Yeah. Very, very painful, right? So no, I'm not going to make him move through that. I'm going to let his body go through that process, which is what I did. And I did support him with pain medication for the first month or 2. I can't remember. It wasn't that long. And then got the x-rays to confirm that we have got fusion now. And then I move forward to treat the dysfunction and retrain the movement pattern. Okay. But number one is pain. We got to deal with that first, right?
Yep.
Especially for a horse, our prey animals. Okay. They are so ingrained to hide the pain. It's hard, right? Yep. They are ingrained for survival. So they are going to keep moving as much as they can, right? Just sort of keep themselves alive. So it is hard as the human to sort of intervene and go, okay, I do need to remove this pain before we can move forward.
Yeah.
That's number one. There's absolutely no training for me or no groundwork, no motor control until pain has been managed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting looking back on my rehab process this time. I mean, as you know, I've had a back injury that recurs. And my final exams really kicked it off this time. Anyways, I was in it for, a good long time and a lot of pain this time. But what I found so interesting is I finally went to a physio, and that wasn't something that I'd done previously, but what she did was gave me, some processes that like exercises that I could do that were outside of the pain.
Yeah.
Right. So I wasn't moving into the pain. I was doing things that actually alleviated the pain or were not painful.
Yeah.
But I was amazed at how fast the improvements became and how fast the bubble began to grow, right? Like the first week I could only literally do extension and that was it. And then I was able to do my bird dogs and I was able to do like extension from lying on my stomach on the floor. And then I was able to do bridge and it sort of all opened up from there. And I found that, it's like stuff that I knew, but feeling it in my own body to see that process of, expansion of my function.
Absolutely. And
my strength
described was that you started with pain-free. Okay. So as I said, never pain. Isometrics, right? So isometric contractions are a contraction in the muscle when it doesn't change length. So it's not moving through a range. We're just activating it and then releasing it. Mm-hmm. An example of that is an isometric contraction of the forearm is I make a fist. I don't bend my elbow. I release my fist. Okay. Yep. So there's been no change in the angle of the joint, but the muscles have contracted. Isometrics are my starting point post-injury. Why? Because they're safe. Okay. Yeah. Isometrics don't lengthen muscle tissue. So we're not at risk of tearing, right? Especially if there's been tearing around the joint, like where there's ligaments involved and tendons and all that. So we don't want to risk re-tearing a sensitive structure that's still healing. But what can we do to start already getting those neural pathways to be firing again and not being scared to fire, right? Because that's the thing, the brain is going to protect us. It's not going to want to fire those things if it senses that it may be painful. So how do we teach it that? We do isometrics. Okay. So in horses, it's so easy because all we have to do is just gently throw them off their center of balance, right? And then we get an isometric contraction. Say I gently press at the horse's chest. They're going to gently lean back. I release. Okay, there's our isometric, and that's it. It's actually so simple. It's mind blowing, right? But these isometric contractions, they work really quickly because the brain is very dynamic, right? Brain is neuroplastic. It is adaptive as long as we give it a new program, right? Or we say, how about this? And if the brain registers a contraction in a muscle that is pain-free, so no pain sensors went off, the brain says, oh, okay, well, that's okay, right? Maybe I don't need to guard it so much, right? So we're kind of tricking it a bit, going, how about this? So isometrics, number one starting point when we're coming back from injury. And as you said, it goes so quickly if you just do it. Okay.
Yeah, you got to do it.
You got to do it every day. And that's the other thing that it becomes a struggle because it's not hard, right? It doesn't require any equipment. You don't even have to take the horse out. You can do this stuff right in the stall. But the only thing that makes this new pathway happen is the repetitions. Okay. So unfortunately, you cannot get the result without doing the work. You actually have to do the work.
Totally.
It's not magic. It is science, you know. So it does take repetition and consistency, but the more we do it, so and I'm only talking like, 20 to 30 reps a couple times a day, but over a week, that adds up to a lot of repetitions. And I think it's been shown now that at about 400 repetitions, that's when there is a new pathway. So we formed a new synapse in the brain to that tissue. Okay. That's where it's formed. Then over the next 10,000 repetitions, it's solidified. Once we reach about 10,000 repetitions, there's no longer conscious thought control required, right? Body just executes that motor pathway without us having to intervene with the brain.
Amazing. Yeah. It makes me think of Raven actually, because as you know, we did Elsa Sinclair's course. And one of the things that was so interesting is Elsa teaches or works with a lot of rocking. So it's actually creating a lot of isometric contraction.
Yeah.
One of the things I noticed with Raven was so one of the ones is, like you said, hand on the chest, asking for, an oscillation back. And then eventually even like a back step, was what she was looking for. Right. Yeah. And it was like initially when my hand went there, Raven didn't even know my hand was there. So I started doing that and it was like, there was almost no rock there. But as I continued to do it and just continued to put that practice in, all of a sudden one day she started to rock back, just like tiny, but little bits. And then now it's like, I can literally put my hand there. She backs up. Like if I ask her to.
And that's a nice progression into a bigger movement pattern, such as the backup, right? So, I mean, with the horses, commonly we have suspensory tears in the hinds, right?
Yeah.
That's really common. And that's painful. Okay. There's no doubt about it. It's painful. The suspensory ligament is a multi joint stability ligament. So if you tear it along the chain anywhere, you're going to have this sort of global effect up through the entire hind limb because it attaches so many moving parts. Now, of course, the brain is going to go into severe lockdown when that ligament is torn, because why? It's very dangerous if we have a torn suspensory ligament as a prey animal, right?
Yep.
We need to get protection some other way. So what's going to happen? All the muscles are going to clamp down, okay, for support in that area. We're going to get the bony movement, right? Like the spine and the pelvis are going to rotate to protect that. And that's going to be our new solution for the horse while that horse is healing, right? But this is the struggle, is that once that tissue is healed, now we've got this old pathway that the horse is going, well, no, I'm traveling. This is how I'm traveling, right? Doesn't hurt anymore so much. But over time, we know that traveling diagonally or putting shear forces through the hind limbs, then we start ending up getting more suspensory tears or arthritis, hock arthritis. We start getting hoof issues, all the way down the chain.
Start getting stuff on the other side. Yeah.
Yeah, because you can't have the weight coming down through the body on a 45-degree angle on a joint that's meant for it to come vertically down through the angle, right?
Yeah.
It's just too much shear force through joints. So it leads to all these other things. Whereas if we can get in there and correct that movement pattern as soon as that acute phase has sort of moved forward into subacute chronic, right? And we can retrain that movement pattern, we save ourselves a lot, right? And I love what you just said about the progression to, it then becomes a backup. And then guess what? The backup becomes the step up onto the box. And then the step up onto the box becomes leg or yielding or hind end yielding, right?
On the box,
on the box. And then we've got, we can do that. We can start stepping over logs and poles again. We can do that. We can start circling again, right? So it is going somewhere. I know sometimes it feels like, this is such a small movement. How could it be? But you have to understand it's a building block, right? It's a building block to activating the bigger movement patterns. And when you do it, it does work. That's why I love it, to be honest. It makes me look like a magician because people see changes immediately, right? That's the thing with the isometric work. If you've got lacking stability somewhere and you do about 15 isometric contractions, that joint is already better supported, okay? Yeah. Right away, you can see a change in us and them. So I love it because it's really demonstratable to horse owners. It's something they can see right away and they can see how easy that was, right?
Yeah. And they can use it. They can do it.
They can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we skip on to another fun, geeky subject, I would love if you might share some of your favorite isometric contraction exercises.
Yeah, it's it's pretty much all variations of these sort of like perturbations off center, right? Yeah. So I'll do ones with my ring bone horse because he had it in one of his front limbs. I would stand at the side of his shoulder and lean on him.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So then what he has to do is laterally stabilize. And then I'd step off. So I would wait till he resists me and then I step off and wait till he resists me and I step off. Okay. So I did a lot of lateral isometrics with him. I do a lot of the backwards isometrics where they have to load into the hind end. Once those are becoming easy, and easy being that you add a little bit of a perturbation, they resist you right away. You can feel that the activation is immediate. Then we can move on. One of the fun ones I did is just picking up feet. Okay. Yeah. So just removing one base of support, right?
Yep.
So that one's super easy. There's actually nothing to it. You just pick the foot up, hold it up for a few seconds, put it back down. If you want to get funky, you can also oscillate them with the foot up. So they have to stabilize dynamically while you're holding the foot up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to think what else I did. I did do a lot of like within that clicker training stuff, just teaching them how to bring front limbs up to a box and then bring it down. So not actually getting up, but just that initial movement of front
step. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. And same thing onto pool noodles with the Hinds, right? We're using mats, like exercise mats, just backing them onto a mat and then doing your oscillations or doing your isometrics. That's another great way to just get
different surface and change in proprioception. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Because the more environments we can give to the nervous system, the better. Right. So it's more adaptable to all the things that are going to present in life, which is that there's going to be different surfaces. There's going to be different movements required. We can't control like the squirrels popping out on the trail, right? Like we have to be ready for dynamic movements down the road. So we have to train dynamic movements.
Yeah.
But it starts out really simple like that.
I love that. Yeah. So, I've shared a few guests on the podcast have shared, different footings, different textures, different, changing the angles, changing the, like over logs, over poles, over,
that's this, more advanced too, right?
Yeah. This sort of stuff though, maybe we can do a bit more of a, if you're open to sharing a more deeper definition of proprioception. I think for a lot of people, understanding the sense of like what is actually going on in a horse's hooves. Like,
oh geez,
I know I'm totally putting you on the spot.
I mean, when I did one of my human dissections in school and we took apart joints and like it was mind blowing seeing the amount of nerves going in and out of everything, right? So we don't think of it so much like, oh yeah, there's a nerve. It's like, yeah, but you know that nerve also like splits off and then splits off and then it splits off, right? Like it's the same thing. It's really complex. And when it comes to the proprioceptors, like they are everywhere, right, in our body. And proprioception is how our nervous system learns how to move and how to be in space, right? I mean, I don't know, we could spend a whole topic, a whole hour on like proprioceptors, but that is what we're training too, is we're training these like innate, involuntary too. Okay. So we don't have to consciously tell our knee proprioceptors to help us restabilize. They just do that. And that's the beautiful thing about it, is it's not in conscious control. So if we can just introduce different environments, the proprioceptors turn on. If you don't know what proprioceptors are, they're like these little sensory receptors within joints. Okay. So there's all different kinds, but there's ones in the skin, there's ones in the joints, there's ones in ligaments, there's ones in muscles, and they all have like specific jobs, but the global job is that it's detecting where we are in space, right? And it's keeping us safe. So the muscle proprioceptors, they're really smart. They don't let our muscles overstretch, right? So they detect when a muscle is becoming too long. Say you're stretching your hamstring, right? And you bring your leg up against the wall and that hurts. You're going to back off, right? That's your proprioceptors. That's your stretch reflex saying, hey, too much pain. It will elicit pain. So we back off, right? So it's protecting us. But those proprioceptors too become ingrained in this compensatory motor control pathway, right? Where they are now saying, oh, no, there's always pain here. So we're always going to be guarding at this angle, right? We can't go past X amount anymore. Mm-hmm. They don't realize either that the tissue's healed. Yes. Yeah. Same thing in the joints. We've got little ones in the joints that are detecting everything like joint position, pressure, shear forces. They're just sending messages every single millisecond to your brain. It's so cool, right? That there's all these processes going on just so that we can be in space. It's absolutely amazing. But yeah, if anyone really wants to geek out, just do like a dissection. They have so many online now that you can sign up. And I just did one on the joints last summer.
For humans?
For humans, yeah. And we did shoulder, elbow, wrist, and then hip, knee, ankle, but the joints, right? Like actually taking apart the joints and looking at all the surfaces, as well as all the fascia and the nervous tissue that was going into it. And it really broadens your appreciation for like just how many structures are there working, right? At all times. Like muscles is just literally one piece of this gigantic puzzle. But so often we get really focused on the muscles because we can see them a lot of the time on the outside of the body, right? Oh, this muscle's tight. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's true, right? But then you have to think about all of the reasons why what muscle would be tight and all the effects that it's going to have, right down to these microscopic proprioceptors that are in the joint that are now struggling.
Man, my brain is just pinging because I want to talk about so many things. I do. I mean, it's very funny. For the longest time, I was like, I'm never working on humans. And now I mainly work on humans. And I was absolutely adamant that I would never work on human feet, particularly. But I love working on human feet because it makes such a difference to the rest of the body. Like it's unreal.
Yeah, it really does, right?
How much change can happen. And one of the reasons is it is a dense area of proprioception, and it is key in our balance and vestibular, connected to the vestibular system. And there are so many people and horses with feet that are like, I worked on a woman yesterday, her feet, and she said, yeah, my feet always feel like kind of blocks. Like they just are like these blocks on the end of my legs. She has Raynaud's, she would get plantar fasciitis, all these things. When I got on her feet, I realized, well, this might be because none of your bones are moving and all of that blood flow that would facilitate the nervous system to work in an optimal way. So she could feel her feet and all of these wonderful intricacies. That was not happening, right? Her body was basically like, I don't know what's happening down there.
So, and you're saying this and I'm thinking in my head, yeah, what do we put on horses' feet?
Right. It's a whole other topic.
So unfortunately, we are losing millions of proprioceptor feedback if we are blocking them via shoes, right?
Yeah.
And I understand we have to do that in some circumstances, but then we need to take that into account, right? And what we're asking of the body when it's quite honestly missing pieces of nervous system control because it's simply not getting the messages to the brain anymore. Those feet, like horses, we'll go into it a little bit. I mean, they have a ton of proprioceptors in the heels, right?
Yeah.
Around the heel area, caudal area. And unfortunately, when we block those proprioceptors with shoes, the horse's foot doesn't get a message of where it is in space, right? So it's harder. It puts more strain in the joints above, like the fetlock, the knee, and the shoulder, because those joints are now compensating if the hoof is to go out of range, right? Because it didn't feel it or because it didn't detect a dangerous range. Then we also have sort of the science behind what we talked about, like the motor control. Like I'll say it right now, like neurons that wire together, fire together, right? So we know that, like, we know that, Alexa. When we have neurons wiring together frequently, they fire together. What that means is movement gets easier if we train it, right? But what happens when we're blocking a signal, such as with shoes on the horse, right? So now we've got neurons wiring together with no pattern. So neurons that have no pattern wiring together get neurons, right, firing together of no pattern. So it becomes a problematic cycle because the longer you don't use it, you lose it. And a lot of these horses that have been in shoes for extended periods of time, it's very hard to get the proprioception back at a certain point, right?
Yeah.
Because nerve cells do die. If they're not used and they're not innervated and that pathway doesn't stay active, they die. It's a conservation of energy sort of situation too, that the body's not going to give resources to something that's not receiving signals, right? Yeah. And that's why I'm so adamant about the barefoot movement and everything. 100% where and when we can. I really want to see that because it just makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, it's been so fascinating to watch Raven for a number of reasons. This horse is teaching me a million things about the nervous system, pain, injury. So, as most of you know, arthritis diagnosed before age 4 at the navicular and coffin joint. And there's various reasons for that, but lots of pain on pain meds from the time she was, on them daily for 2 years before she came to me. Now, one of my things was, this is a horse with gut issues. She can't be on NSAIDs every day. It just doesn't work for her system. And she needs to be absorbing her nutrients. So journey into how do we work with this pain so that she can move in a safe and free way, without these other things supporting her. One of the things, of course, that I heard a lot was you need to shoe her. You need to shoe her. That'll make a difference. And I was very tempted numerous times to put front shoes on her for sure. But when I, intuitively checked in and went, like, it just doesn't feel like the right thing. I wound up keeping her barefoot, and this last week, just the other day, I took her out, just a walk, like hand walk on the road. But she was feeling her oats, feeling good. And she was trotting sound on concrete.
Wow.
This mare. It doesn't always happen that way with her. She moves in and out of feeling that good or not. But it was really, it felt like a confirmation that the work that we were doing around her digestive health, around her nervous system, around, bringing in those isometric contractions, around building her neural patterning in a slow but steady way, was all contributing to her feeling better in her body and feeling more sound on that foot. Now that being said, Elisse knows how much body work I've done on this horse. Right.
Yeah.
And that was an important piece, but it really brings that back as like that proprioception in her feet has made just like an incredible difference. Like the feet that I see now, as opposed to the ones where when I first took her in, as opposed to, prior to that, right?
Yeah.
Totally different horse.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about the isometrics and stuff too. And like, fun fact, another great bonus of isometrics is they act as venous pumps too, right? Yeah. So if we have inflammation in an area, think about how veins are running through muscles, right? Like between them, innervating or draining them. So when a muscle contracts, it actually acts as a physical pump to the venous system, getting blood and fluid out, right? Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that's really great to do when we have acute inflammation, right? It's not dangerous. Like I said, we're not changing any angles of joints. We're not lengthening any tissues, but we're doing an active contraction where the tissue stays the same length, also helping to pump out stuff, right?
Love it. Love it. Now, I want, personally, so number one, I think the track system has helped her a lot, which I see with your horses as well. Number two, cranial work. Now, you may all know that me and Elisse love cranial work for horses. When I first started working with Raven with cranial, and when I started getting it into, a sense of what was going on there, she had rigidity throughout her cranium. She also had very poor lateral occlusion of her jaw, which thankfully we had someone that was able to help a lot with that, which made a huge difference for her fascially. But I feel like that work cranially really was a page turner for us. Yeah. In terms of her being in her body fully and knowing where she was in space, because Raven's a big girl. So, she just, it felt a little like she didn't quite know where her feet were, didn't quite know where she was in space. I felt like that was a real turning point for us. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm thinking about just generally, like we've talked about this on other podcasts, when there's injury or just dysfunction, right? Like chronic issues, and there's pain, there is heightened nervous system activity, right? Again, for protection. So sympathetic sort of state, right? And it's kind of like this low level burning of a high level thing. When we get sustained like contraction of nerve signals, it is exhausting, right? There's only so much the system can take. And then adding to sort of it, like say we have an external compression too from bones being out of place or from muscles being tight, then we get even more effect on the actual nerves that are running up to the brain. So I find like with the cranial work too, I love it for that because it's really great way to get that parasympathetic system on board for a little bit so we can get some work done too, right? Mm-hmm. That may have otherwise been painful. Like for me, I use it a lot to just get the system sort of like, okay, yes, maybe we could do this today and then go in and do my other stuff, right? I love it.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
We could go on for hours about that one.
Absolutely go on for hours about that one. We're both big fans. And I find that bony balance, but when we think about the cranial bones encapsulating the brain, impacting in large ways the cranial membranes, which impacts the spinal membranes, which impacts the sacrum, the pelvic balance. On and on. Tractioning neural sheaths that are going to, put more brace into the system just by matter of
like not just being unhappy about all of the tension happening in the system, right?
Yeah. I think that's actually a really nice segue to something I wanted to talk about today. Just like how to put this all together, like how does this all fit together, right? So I wanted to go over sort of an explanation of like why all this stuff happens, like why this cascade of events happens when we get the injury, and why all these things are affected. What you just said, like we get this and that and this, and then the spine, and then the sacrum, and then the compensatory side, and like, right? So some simple theory on this is the body, ours and theirs, is designed so cool. It's so unique. So we've got mobile segments on top of stable segments throughout the whole body. So it's always alternating. We'll have a mobile part, and then a stable part, and then a mobile part, and then a stable part. Okay. So the
the spine is a great example, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got like the spine, right? Us, them. If we do like a full body rotation, right, we'll notice that our head and neck are going to turn 90 plus degrees if everything's working fine. Then we're going to have the thoracic, like that middle spine, rotate less. Okay. And then the lumbar a little bit more again. So we've got a mobile, the neck is most mobile, right? In us, there's a reason for that. We do need to be able to turn our head all the way around, right? The thoracic spine is not as mobile. Why? Because we've got the ribs there. And that serves as protection for all the organs, right? So we don't want a ton of mobility through that chunk of the body. So it's built a little more stable, like those vertebrae are a little more stacked up on each other, right? But then we get back to the lower back. Oh, well, we do need to be able to bend over, right? We do need to be able to twist. So we're going to have a little more mobility again. Oh, but then we're at the SI joint. That's the next joint down. That's very stable. That's our big joint that disperses forces, right? Coming from the ground. So we want stability there. But then we have our hip. That's mobile again, right? So you start to see this alternating fashion, and there's a reason for it. It's so that we can move in all directions while not completely discombobulating. So we've got stability and mobility, right? It's this beautiful synchronistic thing that is working together. It's exactly the same for them, right? If you think about their spine, that's the same. Into their shoulder, there is one difference is they don't have a clavicle. Yeah. So it's even more mobile, right? In that shoulder joint. But then them too, they're going to have a really stable elbow. Okay. That's a hinge joint. It doesn't move much. Then we get to the knee. So this is a little different than our knee because it's actually our wrist is synonymous to their knee, but their knee is actually pretty mobile because of the carpals. Okay. So yeah, it only moves in flexion and extension, but because of all those little carpals in there, it actually has the ability to twist and turn and rotate, right? Because think of all the forces coming up through the ground, through that knee. It does need to be able to have some rotation capacity. So that's mobile. But then we have the fetlock, very stable, right? We don't have much rotation at the fetlock. But then we get to the coffin, that's mobile, right? Because that's the landing on the ground. It does need to be able to absorb these forces. So it's pretty cool, right? When you start seeing it like that, okay, it's designed like really intricately well to support movement. But what happens if we get an injury in one of those segments? What happens is we take a previously mobile segment. Let's take the knee for the horse because that's a big joint, right? We got a knee injury or a flexor tendon tear in the back, suspensory, whatever you want to, whichever way you want to think of it. Knee injury. So what's going to happen? The horse is still going to have to move around. The horse is still going to have to go get water and get hay. And if it's still being ridden, I hope not, but maybe it's still going to have to get around its day. So what is the body going to do? No problem. We're going to just give a little bit more movement down into the fetlock and up into the elbow, right? So it's just going to use those joint surfaces a little harder to facilitate the movement that's not coming through the knee anymore. Oh, but guess what? The elbow and the fetlock are stable joints. They're not meant for mobility, right? So over time, we're taking a stable hinge joint and we're wearing away surfaces. Then we start to get things like arthritis, right? So you can start to piece together how this happens because the body's going to just do that right? Naturally, it's going to just convert. Here's the solution. We use these segments a little bit more for a little while, but then what we talked about earlier, it doesn't necessarily go back, right? Unfortunately, because it's found a solution. We only need to survive today. That's what our brain knows, right? That's how our brain operates. It's only getting through now. It's not thinking about in 20 years. So no, it's not going to rewire a new pathway all on its own. It's everything's just dandy, according to the brain, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I hope that helps to explain like why this happens and then why we see problems elsewhere when we think, oh, but it was just the knee. Well, no, like this is why these effects happen. And it becomes like really broad when we hit the spine, right? Like you just talked about, because then we're connecting in with the spinal cord itself, let alone the nervous system, but like the cord itself in a physical form, right? And perturbing it from doing its job when we start to get compensations through the spine.
Yeah. I mean, and not even getting into like rider weight and like, we're not even talking about that yet. You know, it's a whole thing. I love this. We have to finish up in like, 2 minutes. But there's so many pieces that have fallen into place. Like one for me is one thing I see so commonly in horses is like the thorax actually becoming more rigid and too stable, shall we call it? Yeah. The ribs stopping their roll, the sternum becoming rigid or immobile. And it's very common. And it's not something that's looked at a lot, like elbow arthritis, because the elbow then has to pick up mobility, I think not only for the knee, but also for up higher, right, into the glenohumeral joint and
like the bicipital tendon and everything too. We're going to start to get bursitis, irritation, tendonitis all through the shoulder, right? Yeah. Which looks like ulcers sometimes too. You go to touch around the girth and they're going to be not happy.
They are going to be not happy. Absolutely.
It hurts.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh. I feel like we could talk for a long time here. And I so appreciate you coming on and sharing all this knowledge, because I think it's just these clarifying pieces for so many of us that go like, those light bulbs go off and we go, oh, like I see what's happening for my horse now. And, now I know kind of a direction to take to support them. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I love this topic, as you know. So I'm happy to go on and on about it all day.
Awesome. That's so great. And while we're here, I just want to share that Elisse and I are teaching 5 equine cranial courses this summer. Yes. And there is ones for manual therapists. So if you're a therapist listening in, we're doing equine cranial level 1 and 2 in Langley, BC. As well as on Vancouver Island, we're doing Cranial 1. And then we're also teaching 2 courses in Langley and on Vancouver Island for just horse lovers to come and partake and learn more about how to do cranial work for their horses and support the nervous system. So we hope to see you there. It'd be great.
As a caveat, we do go over motor control work in our clinics.
Absolutely, right? We do.
This is how we integrate.
Yeah, totally. So there you go. All right. So everybody have a great day. Thanks for listening in. Thanks, Elisse, for being here.
Thanks, Alexa.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everyone. I'm stoked to share that I have a new offering starting April 19th. It's called the Whole Rider Foundation course, and it's made up of 8 90-minute webinars with me. And these webinars dive into topics that are pertinent to us as riders and horse people, but also it comes from an osteopathic approach, an osteopathic lens. So we're looking at mechanisms like the myofascial system, the musculoskeletal system, the pressure mechanisms, postural mechanisms, how your viscera are impacting your ability to be in harmony with your horse. I bet you didn't know that there was things that could change that in your organs and viscera, as well as the craniosacral system and much more.
And each session, I also include a little energy work session with me, as well as an exercise for you to take away into your week and try in terms of that particular topic that week. So it's going to be really fun. I hope that you can join us. You can find out more at alexalinton.com/whole rider. Thanks so much. Hope to see you there. Bye for now.